And I write them out and then I print them in a specific way so that I can make sure to be able to read the text as clearly and as productively as possible. And I always print them on one side of the page. I never do double-sided because words tend to bleed through the page. Well, I was in California this week. And so, yeah, is right. So I wrote the sermon and then I sent it back to have it printed. And it was printed on two-sided. So you'll just have to bear with me as we go through this morning. The second comment I would make is that I'm never critical of Israel from the pulpit. You may know that there are times in which we have had individual conversations, but never am I critical of Israel from the pulpit. And so it brings this message this morning with a bit of anxiety on my part. And it has a lot to do with, of course, what's going on in Israel and the Middle East in general, and of course the war with Iran, which thankfully is in its second set of ceasefire. But beneath the surface there is something much bigger going on. There's something more precise, and I think that the Strait of Hormuz is not just a critical moment and critical location for this war to have found itself, but it's also an extraordinary analogy for what I believe is going on in the hearts of all those people who live in the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passageway of water. It's barely 20 miles across at its tightest point, and through it flows roughly a fifth of the world's oil and many other products. And it is in its very essence an artery. And like an artery, its significance is not in its size, but in what it carries and what happens when the flow is disrupted. Because when an artery in the human heart becomes blocked, the damage is not theoretical. It's immediate and it's cascading. Oxygen cannot reach the tissue that depends on it. Cells begin to starve. And what was once vibrant and alive begins slowly and sometimes suddenly to die. Not because the heart intended harm, not because the system is evil, but because something essential could no longer move. And perhaps most dangerous of all, these blockages rarely begin with a single dramatic moment. They build quietly, gradually, a narrowing over time until one day the system that sustained life can no longer do so. So we ask ourselves, what is this moment really all about? Is this moment of a war with Iran, Israel with Lebanon to its north, is it really about ideology? Is it about nuclear threat? Is it about regional deterrence and power? To which I would say, yes, of course it is. It's about all of those things, but it's also about something deeper, a choke point where the narrowing of something is the story itself, where constriction of resources, of options, of imagination begins to dictate outcomes. And then the even more unsettling proposition: what if all of this isn't entirely conscious? What if no single actor fully chose this path? What if we arrived at this the way the body sometimes moves towards crisis, not through clear decision-making, but through a series of incremental tightenings, each one understandable, each one by itself defensible, each one narrowing the field of possibility a little bit more until suddenly there's no room to breathe. A strait, a narrowing, an artery under pressure. And once we see it that way, it becomes impossible to ignore. This is no longer geopolitical. It is deeply, painfully human. Because blockade is not only something that happens in the Persian Gulf, it's something that happens inside each and every one of us. A blockade, not just of borders, not just of roads and crossings, but a blockade of breathing, of imagination, of the heart's ability to see beyond the next headline. And when that internal flow is constricted, when empathy cannot move, when moral imagination cannot circulate, we experience a kind of spiritual ischemia. Parts of us go numb, other parts harden. The system protects itself by closing until something vital begins to fail. As we've read every week since Israel's beginning, I can only imagine, another soldier dies. This week, Lior Parat, a 31-year-old sergeant. Even in a truce, the ground is seeded with death. And there's not a family in Israel untouched by it, whether in memory, in fear, or in quiet dread of a phone call that may come in the middle of the night. War collapses distance. It reaches from the border into the kitchen, to the Shabbos table, to the silence before sleep. We're living in a moment of narrowing. It started on October 7th this time. Something closed, not just physically, but spiritually. The space to imagine, to respond differently, became constricted. Grief did that. Trauma did that. Fear did that. And that is precisely where the Torah begins this week. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Acharei mot shnei bnei Aharon. God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Acharei mot, after death. After death. After rupture. After moments that change everything. Rashi famously asks, why emphasize Acharei mot, after the death of the two sons of Aaron? And so he offers a parable of a doctor who warns his patient that if you don't begin to eat right, if you don't begin to live a more healthy lifestyle, then look at so-and-so and see what happened to him. The memory of loss is not background. It is instruction. It sharpens attention. It tells us what comes next matters more because of what has already happened. And the Malbim adds a layer that feels almost unbearably relevant. Heim hama'asim shehurgaltem bahem mitzad sheyeshavtem sham. He says something really powerful. He suggests the Torah is not only locating us after tragedy, it's teaching us that moments of rupture create a crisis of boundaries. When something sacred is breached, when proximity, passion, or fear overwhelms restraint, the response can't be to abandon closeness altogether, but to redefine how closeness is approached. In other words, after loss, the instinct is either to rush in without limits or to withdraw completely. The Torah rejects both. It insists on a third path: disciplined engagement, measured entry, a way of remaining connected without being consumed. And perhaps we can hear that now in a different key. Because what is a healthy heart if not a system of regulated flow? Not everything can surge at once, but nothing essential can be completely shut off. Life depends on balance, on openings and limits, on movements and restraint. Every morning we say the bracha, Asher baravo nikavim nikavim chalulim chalulim galui v'yadua livnei kisei kvodecha. If all of our openings never shut, and if all of our shut places never opened up, we could not stand before the Almighty. It's talking about how we physically work so that we can spiritually exist. Life depends on balance, says that bracha, on openings and limits, on movement and restraint. After October 7th, after the ongoing losses, after the names that continue to accumulate, we understand the instinct to close ranks, to protect, to narrow. Rashi understands that's an instinct. The Malbim would name it, but neither would have that as its final word. Because the Torah's response to death is not permanent closure, it is recalibrated opening. It is the insistence that even in moments of devastation, even in moments of fear, of grief, we must find a way to restore the conditions that allow life to flow again. Not recklessly, not without boundaries, but also not in a state of total blockade. And this is where another point in the Parsha deepens the challenge. Kimasei Eretz Mitzrayim, ukimasei Eretz Canaan lo ta'asu. Don't imitate the Egyptians and don't imitate the Canaanites. Here again, the Malbim offers us this extraordinary insight, a piercing insight. Egypt, says the Malbim, represents the past that shaped you. Canaan represents the present that surrounds you. One is the trauma you carry, the other is the pressure you feel. Just one more time. One is the trauma you carry. One is the pressure you feel. And if we're honest, we can already feel how easily it is that pressure bends us. Because there are places right now where we're not holding the line, where the narrowing is not just internal, it's becoming policy, becoming behavior, becoming reality on the ground. We hear serious conversations in Israel about reinstating the death penalty. An idea that halakha has treated with extreme hesitation, that the rabbis call a court that imposes the death penalty a bloody court. We see the failure to confront the violence that Jews of Samaria and Judea are committing. The violence that tests the rule of law, but that should be applied equally. We see violence raging in the streets of Bnei Brak between Jews. It's a society that's turning inward on itself. I think the country is boiling over, not because we're weak, but because the pressure that Israel feels on a regular basis is real. And the space to hold the complexity is shrinking. And that's exactly the moment that the Malbim is warning us about. Israel has for its entire existence fought for its survival, and it carries that trauma. Israel is living right now in extraordinary pressure caused by the nations that surround it. When the past wounds us and the present pressures us, we are most at risk of becoming reactive, of letting fear or anger define the boundaries of what we permit. So the Torah insists, Lo mi Mitzrayim v'lo mi Canaan. Don't act as if Mitzrayim still carries you, not as if Canaan still pressures you. Not from the past and not from the surrounding world. We need to be who we were meant to be. And the Torah says that you are not reducible to either. Not to what was done to you, and not what everyone is doing to you right now. We must choose who we are, because that's the tension we live in. The need for strength is real, and the tension we are living in is real. The need for security is undeniable. But if in the process we allow the arteries of our hearts, of our individually and collective hearts, to close entirely, then something essential begins to die. Not immediately, maybe not even visibly at first, but steadily. Empathy narrows. Imagination constricts. The ability to see the other human being fades. And a society can survive externally, but it can erode internally. That, I think, is what Acharei refuses to accept. The morning's Parashat begins after the death, but it doesn't end there. It demands that we ask the question, what comes next for us? Will we allow the narrowing of the straits of the mitzarim, the difficult moments, to define us, or will we live with care and discipline and begin the difficult work of reopening? The tiftach libi b'oraita. The Torah teaches us to open our hearts with Torah, of restoring flow, of compassion, of restraint, of moral clarity, even when everything else is pushing us in opposite directions. Because the heart is not judged by its strength. It's judged by its ability to circulate life. And so the Torah speaks into this moment not with easy answers, but with a challenge. It says, after the death, after the fear, after the narrowing, can we still choose to be a people in whom something sacred continues to flow? That's the question of Acharei Mot. That's the question of our moment right now. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 184. Chatzi Kaddish, please rise.